What's up, y'all? Proverbs 16. We can make our own plans, but the Lord gives the right answer. People may be pure in their own eyes, but the Lord examines their motives. Commit your actions to the Lord, and your plans will succeed. The Lord has made everything for His own purpose, even the wicked for a day of disaster. The Lord detests the proud, and they will surely be punished. Unfailing love and faithfulness make atonement for sin. By fearing the Lord, people avoid evil. When people's lives please the Lord, even their enemies are at peace with them. Better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest. We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. The king speaks with divine wisdom. He must never judge unfairly. The Lord demands accurate scales and balances. He sets the standards for fairness. The king detests wrongdoing, for his rule is built on justice. The king is pleased with words from righteous lips. He loves those who speak honestly. The anger of the king is a deadly threat. The wise will try to appease it. When the king smiles, there is life. His favor refreshes like a spring rain. How much better to get wisdom than gold, and good judgment than silver. The path of the virtuous leads away from evil. Whoever follows that path is safe. Pride goes before destruction, and haughtiness before a fall. Better to live humbly with the poor than to share plunder with the proud. Those who listen to instruction will prosper. Those who trust the Lord will be joyful. The wise are known for their understanding, and pleasant words are persuasive. Discretion is a life-giving fountain to those who possess it. Discipline is wasted on fools. From a wise mind comes wise speech. The words of the wise are persuasive. Kind words are like honey, sweet to the soul and healthy for the body. There is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. Boy, howdy if that one doesn't get your attention. I'm not quite sure what will. It is good for workers to have an appetite. An empty stomach drives them on. Scoundrels create trouble. Their words are a destructive blaze. A troublemaker plants seeds of strife. Gossip separates the best of friends. Violent people mislead their companions, leading them down a harmful path. With the narrowed eyes, people plot evil. With a smirk, they plan their mischief. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained by living a godly life. Better to be patient than powerful. Better to have self-control than to conquer a city. We may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. There's a whole lot of good in this one. Proverbs 16, I think explains a lot. Right? Some people probably don't necessarily want to hear it. We can make our own plans, but the Lord gives the right answer, right? And that theme is kind of repeated over and over and over again, right? We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. Let's see, where else does it say? There's a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. Right? I think that all those are pretty similar, and I think they're repetitive because I think somebody has to hear or read something about 6 times before it finally sticks. So if the Bible seems like it repeats itself sometimes, congratulations, it's because it does, right? If it's repeating a lesson, then it's one that's worth knowing, right? For example, like you start playing a sport or something like that. Or like an example I can relate to, even if most of y'all probably can't, like airborne school, right? Whenever you're jumping out of airplanes, you go through 3 weeks of literally doing the same couple movements over and over and over and over and over again, and reciting the same thing. So whenever it does come time to jump, your body jumps into muscle memory, right? Repetition drives the lesson home. So if a lot of these sound pretty similar, driving home the same lesson, it's because they are, right? I think that lesson is you can make your own plans, and you might think that you know the right path, but you don't. He does, right? Stuff ain't gonna take him by surprise, whether it's good or bad, right? And a lot of times it's gonna be a path that doesn't necessarily make sense to you at the time. Kind of because you're in the middle of it, and until you get out of it, you can look back on it, look down on it a little bit. It doesn't make much sense. Like for me, I guess just kind of like a personal testimony to that. I lived in Alaska for a while. It was time to come back to Alabama and looking for a job. Fire department for Huntsville opened up, right? And everything absolutely fell into place for me to fly down here, go through the beginning orientation, because with the fire department, if you miss any part of orientation, you're dropped from selection, right? It was a small class. I already had my EMT license. Things were going well, right? Flew down here for orientation, flew back up to Alaska, drove my family from Anchorage down to Alaska over 10 days. That was a whole story in and of itself, right? And all the bad weather missed us because we did it in January in the winter, right? Driving through Canada and stuff. Never got caught up in like any kind of crazy wrecks or anything like that, right? I can undeniably say that the Lord guided our steps on that one, right? On getting us back down to Alabama. I was in better shape, so did really good at the physical test, did really good on the written test. Thought I did decent in the interview, and everything was stacked up where I was thinking I was going to get this job as a firefighter down here, and it fell through and didn't get it, right? For one reason or another. And I had pretty much bet my family's future on it, and I was in an absolute blind panic, more or less. And I can remember one night, I think Jess had already fallen asleep, and I was kind of raging against God a little bit, kind of pissed off on why'd you even bring me down here if I ain't even gonna have this. Now I've got no income coming in, living off the savings, don't have a house, living in my parents' basement right now with my wife and child. And I don't even have square one to start on for having any kind of actual job that's going to pay anything, right? Sure enough, started looking forward and found the job that was what I needed at the time, and I'm still working here. And at the time, it was funny because the job's in Scottsboro. And even before we ever moved back down here, started looking to live in the fire department or anything like that, and we had talked briefly about moving back down to Alabama one day. We were joking around that we'd probably end up in Scottsboro instead of Hazel Green or Gurley or Huntsville or anything like that. And sure enough, that's where we ended up at, right? So you can have your own plans. Like, I want to work for the fire department, but the Lord's going to guide your steps where it might look like you're walking that way. And then you pivot at the last minute, right? I'm thankful it did, because now I ain't got to live in Huntsville, because Huntsville drives me absolutely bonkers now. Can't stand going there for really much any reason anymore. It's gotten way too crowded. I got a job that provides enough that wife doesn't have to work, so she can spend time with our kids right now while they're young. I mean, she'll eventually go back when they both start school, but as of right now, she can build memories with them and give them a solid foundation. And would not have been able to do that if it wasn't for this job, being honest with you. It's something that I'm thankful for. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But you want to talk about a test of faith and stuff not taking the Lord by surprise, but taking you by surprise. And trying to be a steward of the blessing that you've been given. And again, Lord he sets the pace and he sets the steps, and if it seems like it's a little awkward to you, that's all right. Keep following because it pans out in the end, right? But anyways, by fearing the Lord, people avoid evil. It's funny because there's a lot of people that won't claim Christianity for one reason or another. They still try to be a quote unquote good person. and you look at a lot of things they do, and they still line up with Christianity, right? Not that being a good person gets you into heaven. It doesn't. But as far as people living a life that is generally considered worthy, principles are pretty similar, right? Everybody's heard pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall, right? Whenever you start to getting too big for your britches is usually whenever something happens if you don't keep yourself humble. Good Lord above will usually do it for you, and man, I'll be honest, I'd rather do it on my terms than his, because he'll make the lesson stick, right? And it should be that way, because earlier on how it says, or it might be a little bit later on here in Proverbs, where it talks about how the Lord disciplines those he loves, right? If you get a little big for your britches and he ain't doing much about trying to help keep you humble some, right? Doesn't have to be anything big, but giving you a slice of humble pie every now and again, you might want to kind of sit back and think about what you're doing and who you're actually serving, right? Are you serving the idea of Jesus, or are you serving Jesus, right? There's a difference in that. Let's see. Better to be patient than powerful. Better to have self-control than to conquer a city. There's another proverb too that kind of corroborates that. I think it says something along the lines of like, someone without self-control is like a city without walls, right? Which back then was a big deal, because if your city didn't have walls, you left the gates open. That's how people got conquered and killed, right? Or dragged into slavery. And so if you're like a city without a wall, right? Then you might, because you lack self-control. If that's what they're likened to each other, the lack of self-control, being a city that's just wide open, those people will end up in slavery, or at least they did back whenever this book was written, right? And you will too. A lot of people have heard that sin will take you a whole lot farther than you ever meant to go, and it'll keep you there. And personal testimony, that's true. And it ain't fun, right? But it does give you appreciation whenever you're kind of out of the woods in that sense. But better to be patient than powerful, and better to have self-control than to conquer a city, right? And self-control has been on my mind a whole lot lately, right? In the physical sense as well as the spiritual, right? What you put in your body is what you're going to feed off of, right? You literally are what you eat. Same thing spiritually, right? If you're just ingesting nothing but reality shows all the daggone time, and you're not feeding yourself spiritually, you going to church, talking to folks, spending your own time in your own Bible, things like that, and all you're doing is ingesting garbage, you had a higher chance of being garbage, right? I'm not saying that they ain't something that everybody who goes to church is a saint, because they ain't, right? It's something you got to watch out for. But it doesn't matter if you can conquer a city if you don't have self-control, right? You can be in charge of even self-control in the most basic sense of having self-control over your body physically, right? It doesn't matter if you're a leader of the world or anything like that. If you can't control your bladder, it ain't gonna be a good time, right? If you don't have that self-control, like, hey, I should probably go do something about this before it turns into an issue, right? It don't matter, right? You gotta have self-control. And that's something that for me is kind of hard, because I like food and I've gotten fat. Just being honest, right? There are some days where I can eat a whole lot healthier and I can keep that up for a while, or keeping up workouts, things like that. And there are some days, I'll be honest, I really don't want to. But I guess in doing things is more discipline, and in not doing things is more self-control. And then down at the very last verse of chapter 16, it says, we may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. If you ever read the Old Testament, anytime it talks about casting lots, for people dividing something up or trying to figure out what God's saying or something like that. That's essentially what it is everybody kind of agrees, hey, Lord, bless these dice, we're going to roll them, and whatever they say is whatever you say. And he's done it, and he'll do it again. Right? You can try to manipulate stuff all you want, but the Lord, it just talks so much about how the Lord knows the human heart and everything like that, right? And how well He knows us. He made us even before we were in the womb, right? Ain't nothing we can do to catch Him by surprise. Ain't no way that we can put Him in a bottle. And ain't nothing that the enemy can try to do, or your own stupidity has a consequence to. It's going to take Him by surprise, which is pretty comforting, I think. Anyways, yeah, Proverbs 16. Get home, read it, take it easy.